We're talking about the relationship between language and reality and exploring this idea that maybe not having a word to describe something affects how and even whether we can perceive that thing. Josh sent me a fascinating example of the Hiba tribe in Africa who don't have a word for the color blue, and guess what? They can't tell the difference between blue or any other color on a visual level. I did some further reading, and it turns out that ancient cultures also didn't have a word for blue. I mean, Homer famously and bizarrely described the color of the sea in the Odyssey as deep red like wine. You're like, what? Are we saying that the ancient people couldn't tell the difference between blue and other colors? Is blue a recent discovery in our history? Josh sent me another interesting example of the link between language, reality, and color. So, they did studies on babies using neuroimaging, brain scans, while showing these babies colors. And they did these studies in two separate phases. The first was before these babies had developed language, and then after the babies had learned the words for colors. And the studies showed that learning the words for colors like blue actually altered the children's perception. Different areas of the brain fired up. Different parts of the brain were processing the information, parts of the brain that are linked with language. And the researchers concluded that once we learn words to describe colors, it actually alters how we perceive those colors. Giving it a name changes how we see it. Fascinating. I guess this is quite an interesting discovery because it shows the power language has on our minds to alter our perceptions. What we're seeing is not what's really right in front of us, but it's an interpretation of what we have in our head, of our visual internal reconstruction of what's out there. And that is impacted not just by what's coming through the photons into our eyes, but also through the language we use to describe that experience. Whoa. So, evidence is mounting that until we have a way to describe something, we might not even see it's there. It makes sense, though, if you think about it, that language could rewire our perception, because language forces us to pay greater attention to the things that we can actually name, as opposed to things that we don't name because perhaps we're not even paying attention to them, we're ignoring them. And the more you pay attention to something, the easier it becomes to distinguish its features, like the Hiba tribe, who can tell the difference between myriad shades of green, which we can't even recognize, and they have names for every one of those shades. And the example I gave to Josh when I spoke with him is perhaps this is how entomologists can spot individual ants and flies from a colony, where we couldn't even tell the difference between someone from, Namibia and someone from Ghana, unless, we were expert in the field or with that part of the world. On a related topic, I guess we should talk a bit more about Amazonian tribes that still have primitive languages. How does that affect their perception of the world?